Hello and welcome to this lecture video on practical ethics. In this lecture, I will talk about the methodology we will be using for the course and introduce the general terms public service and profession in order that we have clarity on what it is we'll be covering in this course, since this is a course on ethics in the professions and the public service. So the material covered in this lecture includes some of the material that you'll find in the articles by Lynch and Zimmerman included for your reading in Learning Module 1. Let me begin by just talking a bit about applied ethics as the standard approach that philosophers take when they're looking at a particular area or discipline. If you're not familiar with ethical theory or with applied ethics, or for that matter, if you're not very familiar with philosophy, I strongly suggest that you review the material included in the folder on background. And you can find that in SAC-CT, just above the folder with the Learning Module 1 material. There you'll find some information on what philosophy is, what ethics is, and additional material as necessary. I strongly suggest you review that material even if you are familiar with ethics and philosophy, since you never know, you might find some of it included in your first quiz. Alright, applied ethics. Applied ethics begins from the point of view of an ethical theory. Let's take, for example, utilitarian ethics. Now what we want to do is we want to apply this theory to a case or a dilemma. We might have a case of euthanasia from medical ethics, or we might have a case of defending a guilty client in legal ethics. And what we would do is we would address those cases through the lens that utilitarian ethics applies. So given the terms of the case, how can it be solved using utilitarian ethics? That would be the approach we take in applied ethics. And so what it allows us to do is to verify the theory, primarily. So if utilitarian ethics allows us to solve these particular cases well enough, then that implies that the theory is good or reliable. If the theory can't help us to solve these cases, or if they're especially difficult cases, then that might indicate a limitation or a problem with the theory. So the approach of applied ethics seeks to solve dilemmas in cases only secondarily. The real interest is in getting the theory correct. Of course, there are several limitations, first among which is that we have deliberation about a case that is primarily theory-driven. Our focus is on the adequacy of the theory, not on resolving the actual problem in the case. Secondarily, we have a limitation, which is that the resolution that we might find for the case or for the dilemma would be limited to the scope of the theory. For example, utilitarian ethics focuses our attention on pleasure and pain, and if a particular case isn't amenable to solving by reference to pleasure and pain, then either we won't be able to solve the case, or what we'll get as a solution is an inadequate or a distorted solution to the case, which really would be no solution. A third limitation is that rarely are real-life circumstances captured completely and accurately within a single theoretical perspective. And so if we try to use a theoretical perspective and shoehorn the case to fit it, or try to work our life according to what a theory would allow, then that might actually distort not just our lives, but the solutions to the problems that we're trying to find. So there has to be another way we can do this. Practical ethics is a nice alternative approach to the approach of applied ethics. And it's a nice alternative because it actually begins from the point of view of a particular practice. And by practice, I'm just going to be very general here. By practice, I might include nursing, policing, accounting, parenting, carpentry, horse training, etc. All of these are practices. Practical ethics then identifies practitioners' ideals of good practice. So we go to the practitioner and we find what it is that they identify as the ideals that make a good practitioner. Nurses know what it means to be a good nurse. Police can identify the features or the characteristics of a good police officer, etc. And so we take within it, from the point of view of the practice, the frame of reference that makes a particular practitioner good at that particular practice. From those ideals of good practice, ethicists then identify norms and principles which govern the practice. And so these norms and principles govern the practice, but they arise from the practice and are used by the practitioners. Primarily, what we do is we look at the purposes for which the practice exists. We also look at the set of activities or undertakings or conduct which characterize the best of the practice. And we look to the ideals which inform the development, the maintenance, and the evaluation of the practice by its practitioners. Practices are ongoing. They don't have a definite start, middle, and end. Practices arise in order to solve social problems, and we try to solve them, and as we solve them, we keep what works and we don't keep what doesn't work, and so we have to have some way to develop, maintain, and evaluate our practices, and these are the ideals that we hold when we put the practice in place. Now that we're familiar with what it means to take an approach of practical ethics, let's take a look at the two areas of primary concern in this course, and that is the public service and the professions. And so we'll look at public service first. You might ask yourself, okay, what is the public service? What do I mean when I'm talking about the public service? For the purposes of this course, the public service is broad and expansive. It is that which administers governance. The public service doesn't govern. The public service isn't governed, but the public service administers governance. So here I'm excluding politicians, legislators, and such, but I'm including the whole range of people and offices that make governance work. The public service executes public policy. It designs and implements regulatory instruments. It provides public goods, makes them available to the public. It offers oversight of private partners and contractors. Those partners and contractors the government employs to undertake certain projects. The public service also assesses the need for policy and regulation or for changes in policy and regulation. And it ensures compliance and oversight of public offices, private contractors, and public-private partnerships. The public service is comprised of scientists, researchers, engineers, lawyers, justices, advocates, nurses, doctors, medical personnel, teachers, military personnel, police, accountants, contracting officers, controllers, emergency personnel, firefighters, and a whole lot of other people, including the frontline clerical and reception staff, the people who actually help you solve your problem when you go to the DMV or when you go to City Hall. The public service is also characterized by specialized expertise and experience. You'll notice that in the list of individuals who are members of the public service, scientists, researchers, engineers, many of them are also themselves professionals, and we'll take a look at that overlap shortly. Why do we need a public service? Well, we need some agency, some body, some group of our community who operate between the politicians who make decisions, the legislators who create regulations and laws, and the public who are the people who are served, whose good is served by those activities. And the public service mediates. The public service primarily is responsible for the distribution of public resources for the public good. Their primary responsibility is to serve and empower citizens, especially so in a democracy. This responsibility ought to guide the management of public organizations and institutions. It also ought to guide the implementation of public policy, and it also ought to guide the provision of public services. An effect of the public service benefits the entire community. So when the public service is effective, when it's doing what it ought to do, the whole community benefits, because it then is in a position to support social and economic infrastructure and to allow society to be complex but organized in order to achieve a variety of ends and purposes that the individuals within it have. Public service also attends to social organization. and needs which are not appropriate to leave to market or private models. Now, this is a highly contested point, the degree to which anything can or should be outside of the market or should be privatized. There's a dispute about that. Political philosophers, political theorists, economists, sociologists all contest the degree to which anything that is a matter of public service can be achieved as well or equally well by the market, or whether it should all be privatized. But however we draw the line between market and private models and the public service, at some point there will be some areas of life that are just best administered with a public good in mind and not necessarily with market or private interests in mind. The public service also treats citizens as equal and as universally entitled. If there's a public good to be had, we each have a share of it. Now, of course, there are challenges for the public service. We, the public, tend to be conflicted in our views toward the public service. We see them as not just a benefit, but also as a cost. The public service doesn't come free. No one works for free. There are salaries and offices to be maintained. There are facilities to be maintained. There are costs associated with implementing policy and regulations. And all of this can sometimes be experienced as a financial burden on the public, which means that our taxes go up. But it can also be experienced as an impediment to the ends that I'm trying to achieve. If I'm a grocery store owner and I want to expand to include the sale of beer in my grocery store, I have to make sure that my facility is licensable, that I apply with the right regulatory agency, and so it can feel like an impediment. I have this one simple desire that I want to effect, and I've got to go through all of this bureaucratic paperwork that can feel like a barrier, like something that impedes me from doing what it is that I want to do. And so the result of this is that we are contradictorily disposed to the public service. There are contradictions in the public's opinion about the value and the purpose of the public service. The public expects bureaucratic virtues. We expect our resources to be distributed not just equally and universally, but to be distributed in accordance with rules and principles. We want those resources administered objectively and rationally. We want them also to be administered fairly. That is, there shouldn't be any difference in how I'm treated from how my neighbor is treated. It shouldn't make any difference whether I have access to resources because I'm wealthy or because I'm poor. It should be characterized by fairness. And we also resent, though, this resulting bureaucratic rigidity, because when we have rules and principles in place, it can often seem like the process is unreasonably rigid. And so the public can also demand from the public service a degree of compassion and equity, especially before denying or cutting services or making resources unavailable to some sectors of the public. But when we, on the one hand, demand this sort of compassion or this degree of discretion, we also decry the resulting loss of efficiency and cost-effectiveness, and sometimes what results in the appearance of unfairness. So the result is that we often are willing to vote for reductions in public services. We support budgets that cut back on the resources available to administer the governance of our society, and we also then shouldn't be surprised if we lose the best and the brightest from careers in the public service because of this conflicted view. We love and we hate public servants. Let's take an opportunity to reflect just a minute. Think about these questions. Professions, what are they? Well, professions affect almost every aspect of our social lives. There are professionals who operate in healthcare, in education, in public safety, in building infrastructure, in finance, in markets, in media, and law, and so forth. But what makes a profession distinct from an occupation? Well, there are certain features of a profession that are important to note. Professions are occupations which develop and apply specialized, often technical knowledge. They're also organized and self-perpetuating. That is, they have the requirement for extensive formal education through which professionals acquire that technical knowledge, and requirements for training and often licensure. Professions also have discretion over the application of that specialized knowledge. That degree of discretion can be both a source of benefit and a challenge for professionals. But they determine how it is that their knowledge is applied. And professions are, on the one hand, self-regulating, usually through an internally developed ethics code, and they're also externally regulated, usually through some externally imposed statutes, legislations, or policy. Now, the reason why professions are externally regulated is because the public has a compelling interest in ensuring that professionals who have that knowledge and that discretion to use that knowledge do so in a way that benefits society. We recognize that the public interest is served by allowing professions to have a considerable degree of monopoly over their knowledge and its use. So, for example, I see the benefit of having attorneys, even though I might not like lawyers, because that allows me to then hire an attorney to defend me from a criminal charge, let's say, rather than spend years trying to learn about the law sufficient to secure my own acquittal. I can also go to see a doctor about the pain in my abdomen rather than trying to figure out through the study of medicine what that pain is and how to operate to take care of it. Challenges for the professions. Knowledge is power. Monopoly of knowledge is monopoly of power. This is a significant challenge for professionals because, in large part, professions demand and expect compliance with their directives. Civil engineers expect society to take them and their expertise seriously when they make recommendations about how to build bridges or how to design cities or how to refurbish ports or levees. That power can benefit, but it can also harm. When that power is misused, then professionals can cause grave harm not just to their client, but to society more broadly, and also to their own fellow professionals. The monopolization, use, and effects of power require justification and accountability. And so the public has interest in constraining professions in their use of this power that they've acquired through their knowledge, expertise, and training. Within a democracy, three values stand out. The value of social trust, which professions and professionals owe to the whole of society. And so here the requirement would be that professionals not act in ways that lead the public to mistrust either them as individual professionals or the profession as a whole. Second is fiduciary duty, which is owed to particular individuals and clients. And this value requires professionals not to act in ways which are contrary to the interests of their client. Now, you might notice that acting according to the value of social trust might lead a professional into conflict with acting in their fiduciary duty. It may be the case that my client has a particular interest in developing a levee, or actually perhaps removing a levee from their property which abuts a river. But the public has an interest in that levee being in place and being as solid as it can be, because if there's a breach when the river floods, not just that property owner is affected, but the whole community surrounding it. So the engineer would have a challenge in deciding how to meet both requirements. The third value, which constrains professional power in a democracy, is careful maintenance of equality between the professional, her client, and the public. Now, equality seems an odd value because when one has a degree of knowledge and expertise different from someone else, that can give them a sense of superiority. And it's that sense of superiority that really has to be tempered. Rarely is it the case that the professional and their client are on equal footing, because the professional has knowledge which the client lacks. But that knowledge that the professional has which the client lacks cannot be a source of abuse of power. The professional must always ensure that they treat their client as an equal member of the community. Here's an opportunity for reflection. Take a look at these questions, think about it, pause the video if you want. Now, what you might have noticed, and what we can discern through the methodology of practical ethics is that there are certain common values that both the public service and the profession share. There are 4 actually, and these 4 values will shape and inform the rest of the semester. First, both professionals and public servants have the responsibility to empower others to make good decisions and to act on them. This is what we often refer to as autonomy. Second, professionals and public servants have the responsibility to ensure fair treatment for everyone with whom they deal. Fourth, professionals and public servants have the responsibility to ensure integrity in the delivery of services and in their exercise of power, authority, and discretion. The integrity of the professional, as well as the integrity of the profession, the integrity of the public servant, as well as the integrity of the public service are at stake. And each has the responsibility to ensure that integrity is maintained. Fourth, the responsibility always to seek the best results, not for oneself, but for those who one serves. When a professional serves their client, they should always do so with the best interests of their client in mind. And when a public servant serves their client, which is the broader public, or a particular individual member of that public, they should always strive to seek the best results for them. Wrapping up, so the values and principles of the public service are similar. There's also a close coordination between public service and the professions. Remember that many of the public servants that we're familiar with are also themselves professionals and members of professions. They serve the same public, whether individually as clients or in groups and communities as the public. And they often experience mutually reinforcing regulations, both internal, self-imposed regulation through ethics codes and external regulation. They are also constrained by their respective public values: social trust, fiduciary duty, and equality. A practical ethics approach allows us to identify the values relevant to the practice from the point of view of the practice. Finally, here are some questions to think about. You can pause the lecture now and reflect on these questions. If you can answer these questions satisfactorily, then you should be fine for the next lecture. Thank you very much.